Welcome to our third week looking at the Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, and together with Douglas Abrams. It's Dalai Lama, a Buddhist, Desmond Tutu, a Christian, and Douglas Abrams is a Jew. My favourite religious joke of the moment is an imam, a priest, and a rabbit walk into a bar, and the rabbit says, "I think I'm a typo." Now, as you try and work that one out, I'll tell you about our third pillar of joy. So we started with perspective, and this is the one that opens all the other pillars. So seeing things from a different viewpoint, trying to find a different angle, can often open up so many new ways of seeing and being. The second pillar was humility, and we spoke a little bit last week about the fine line that humility takes, that false humility, and also that idea of being used as a doormat. So our third pillar, quite surprisingly, is humour. And they say that being able to laugh at a situation and being able to laugh at yourself, both these men find really important. The Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, they often describe each other as mischievous, and there's a lot of laughter goes on in the book. They often pull each other up, and when they do so, it's often with the words, "You need to act a little bit more like a holy man." And I think they find the pomposity of their positions, or where they've been placed by other people, as quite humorous as well. You need to act like a holy man. And I think there's something in that put down, gentle put down, which reminds us that so often the piousness of religious people it is really nothing more than an act, and those who are really comfortable with themselves in their own skin can have an awful lot of joy. When we think about humour and the church in Scotland, we often think about the Reverend I.M. Jolly, a great satire of the Church of Scotland. But again, it was done really with tongue-in-cheek, and Ricky Fulton, I believe, was indeed an elder in the Church of Scotland, so he was able to laugh at himself, the institution that he held quite dear. The Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, they use humour in different ways. One way is to diffuse a situation, and both these men have been placed in really tense situations, places where there's a lot of anger and a lot of hurt, and they've used humour to diffuse a situation. In the book, Desmond Tutu talks about conducting funerals in the apartheid South Africa, and at that time any political gathering was banned, but funerals could still take place. So funerals became a mix of mourning the death of the person, but also because they gathered there together, they became almost like political rallies, and there was a lot of hurt and anger that came into them. He tells of conducting one funeral where there was a lot of anger, which he sensed, and he started telling a story. He says that we were all made, God made us out of clay. We were made and formed out of clay and put into an oven like you would, a kiln, like you would bake bricks. So the first batch God put in, and he went off and did something else and was quite busy, and he forgot all about the batch that was in the kiln. And he rushed back, opened it up, and they were burnt to a cinder. And Tutu then says, and that's how black people came about. And there was a ripple of laughter through the funeral. And says, God then put another batch in, but this time he was so over anxious, he opened the kiln up far too early. They were underdone, and that's how white people came about. So he used humour just to diffuse a situation. The Dalai Lama talks about being invited to a meeting in Northern Ireland, and both sides were there, and again a lot of anger, and someone saying, I've always been taught to hate and distrust Catholics because they are wrong, and I am a follower of Jesus, and Jesus was a Protestant. And the Dalai Lama, being a good Buddhist, obviously knew that Jesus was a Jew, and burst out laughing, and laughed so much that the whole atmosphere began to change in that meeting. Tutu makes fun of himself quite often. He often makes fun he says he's got an awful big nose, and he makes fun of that. And he tells a story of being invited to speak in Rwanda after the genocide, and during that gathering of Tutus and Hutus, he tells the story about people with big noses, and how these people with big noses distrusted those with small noses, and the small noses distrusted those with big noses. And he told this big story until his audience realised that they were laughing at themselves, at the ridiculousness of the events and the world that had been created around them. And humour is used to show the ridiculousness of events, of systems. How do you challenge some of those big systems like apartheid? Humour, it can be one way of doing that, showing how ridiculous it is. And it also challenges people, pomposity, and people would think they're far too serious about themselves. So they use humour as a way of stopping themselves taking themselves too seriously. And the Dalai Lama thinks that humour, like everything else, is something that can be taught. It's not something that is just innate within us, it can be taught. I think we quite often read the Bible in church as a serious document, so we take it very seriously, and because we do that, we miss the humour in it. And there are many biblical scholars who think that when Jesus was speaking to the crowds would probably have been rolling around laughing at some of his stories, and yet we'll hear them in church in stony silence as we try and take them too seriously. But they would have thought of someone with a plank in their eye trying to take a speck out of someone else's eye as really funny. A camel passing through the eye of a needle, it's easier for that to happen than a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. So they would have seen a lot of these both as humorous in themselves, witty satire, a way of exposing the ridiculousness of the system and the events around them, and also bringing those who thought they were more superior than others, bringing them down a peg or two. So Jesus is using humour, many would argue, in the way that many of our satirists would use today, just to expose the ridiculousness of a situation, and making it funny allows us to sit back and then realise that we're laughing at ourselves or at the situation around us. But it can be difficult to laugh at times. It can be really, really hard. I have said before that the old Buddhist technique of allowing a half smile to spread across your face, especially first thing in the morning, will immediately lift your moods. It's hard to be bitter and angry when you're smiling, and that is something that they would teach to the young monks, to allow that smile to come across their face, just to lift their moods and put them in a better place to deal with the day that was to come. So something as simple as that reminds us that our moods and emotions are really important, And humour is a way of lifting ourselves up. If you can laugh at yourself, then there is something solid about who you are and who you know yourself to be. And I think that is why this is the third pillar of joy. Really important, and you'll see again that it's trying to change the perspective of how we look at a situation and ourselves. And if we change that perspective and add in humility, not taking ourselves too seriously, again, just knowing that we are a gift from God, but we are just a small cog in a huge machine, but a very important cog. So humility reminds us that, as the Dalai Lama would say, I'm just another one of the 7.8 billion people in the world. And Tutu would say, but you're a very special and important one because you are one of God's children. So it's getting that balance right there. So we have in the book another little meditation on humour, and again this idea that humour is not something that's innate within some of us and not in others, but is something that can be cultivated, but also that the ability to laugh at ourselves and to see the rich ironies and funny realities in our lives is actually like perspective, something that we can learn with practice over time. So again, a little meditation, so let's just still ourselves, maybe with a few breathing exercises, just again to still ourselves, centre ourselves and allow ourselves to be open to the teaching and to the spirit of our meditation. Think of one of your limitations, human faults or foibles. Think of something about yourself that is actually quite funny when you can have some perspective. The Dalai Lama can laugh at his limited English. The Archbishop can laugh at his big nose. What can you laugh at about yourself? When can you laugh at yourself? And when you can laugh at yourself, you will let others feel closer to you and inspire them to accept their own limitations and faults. It's not easy to laugh at ourselves, but it is a helpful and useful practice. So next time you're in a situation where you act in a funny way, or you say something in a funny way, or are just less than perfect, chuckle at yourself and make a joke of it. Humour is one of the best ways to end conflict, especially when you are able to make fun of yourself and admit that you are overreacting or being silly. So we can get awful uptight or angry or annoyed at ourselves when things go wrong. Can we take that pause and see it from a new perspective, to see the funny side and to laugh at ourselves? What about laughing at life? Next time you are delayed or something does not go your way, try being amused by the situation rather than getting angry or outraged. You will notice how your amusement puts others at ease and can often smooth the situation. Similarly, when you encounter certain ironies in your day-to-day life, try to see the humour in it. Little meditation on humour. And again, that half smile is a useful tool if something happens and we feel ourselves beginning to get angry and irritated, just to be able to pause, allow that half smile, and maybe that half smile allows us to step back and take a different perspective, and maybe to laugh at ourselves. Perspective, humility and humour. And of course, humility and humour come from that same root word for humus, for the earth. We are all made from clay, made from the earth. Humility and humour can often bring us back down to earth in a good and healthy way. Pillar 3 of the 8 pillars of joy, humour. We'll see you all again next week for our 4th pillar of the pillars of the head, and then we'll move on to the 4 pillars of the heart. Take care. God bless.